I get all these emails where it's like every Tuesday or every Monday, and it's literally just a copy of the show notes in an email. And I was like really sitting with it because I was like, this doesn't really entice me. Like, I don't really feel like I want to go listen to the episode. And when I get to that thought process, I always think, well, why? Why is that? And so for me, it turned into, well, I don't feel enticed because I'm already technically subscribed to the podcast. Apple Podcasts, like that's what I use to listen to mine, already notifies me of a new episode. And so I'm already aware that Susie Q's episode already comes out every Tuesday. I already got that, right? And so what ends up happening within that as well too is then we start to realize, oh, okay, now we're getting kind of into like a repetitive mode where we're just going to get ignored. So then the question really comes down to of like, okay, how can we show up consistently for our audience to share about our podcast in a non-repetitive way that they're just going to basically archive our message?
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead-generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the podcast, I had a chat with Ashley DeLuca. She's an email strategist and is so incredible. She's had her podcast for a few years now. I think you are going to love this episode. If you want to turn your listeners into email subscribers, then you're definitely going to want to pull out a notebook. Toward the end, she gives step-by-step strategies on ways that you can make sure that you are doing everything you can to bring your listeners into email subscribers. So definitely watch out for that. And be sure to tune in to Ashley's rebranding section where she talks about what it took for her to rebrand her podcast, why she did it, what kind of went into that, and all of that. So let's welcome Ashley. Ashley, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you today. If you could just tell everybody who you are, what you do, what your podcast is about, and all that fun stuff.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so incredibly much for having me. I am super incredibly stoked to be here and to share with your listeners all things with email and linking that with podcasting and all of that amazingness. And if you can't already tell, I absolutely love email marketing. Basically what I do is I really focus on intentional email marketing communication in order to be able to amplify relationships, retention, and referrals, which at the end of the day, all equal money, right? And so within that, I started podcasting. Gosh, it feels like 3 years now. I always lose track. But I will say, when I first started, I was super inconsistent. It was called Connect and Convert at the time, and I was just trying to do the things. And that's actually how I met you as well, because I was like, I know I can do better, but I don't even know what better is. I just know that I'm not doing it. And so I know you had given me like a nice little audit, and that was super helpful. And then after that, I ended up rebranding to Email Marketing Simplified, which kind of encompasses the email marketing. But now, which by the time this airs, it will actually now be called the Communication Conversation. And basically what it's going to be about is, again, that intentionality. For me, communication is really about being super intentional. And I do it through email marketing. Like, that's my favorite channel of doing the things. But it also applies to podcasting. It also applies to how you show up on Facebook or Instagram or any of the other pieces. And just making sure that you're intentional about like who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, what is the content, what is the message, and then what is the timing of that, and understanding those pieces that come with it.
Oh, that's so good. So let's talk about that rebrand and the rebrands that you've done in the past. How have you kind of chosen or not chosen to be strategic in your rebrand, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I like to say I'm not necessarily lazy, although my husband would probably say otherwise. I just like to keep things as easy as possible. That's really what it comes down to, is I just like want to make it as easy as possible for me, for the person on the other side, like all parties involved, including my 2-year-old. And so essentially, you know, when I looked at it, I always am like, okay, do I really need to actually rebrand? Does this make sense to actually change the name and redo podcast art covers and all, you know, because there are quite a few pieces that go into that in terms of with rebranding. And it's not usually as simple as like with a Facebook group, you just change the name and you're like, oh, here we are, it's all good. Like, there's a little bit more that goes into it. And so for me, it's always been, okay, what is shifting? Does it make sense in terms of with the messaging and the content that I'm sharing? And like, does it make sense to then shift that to also align with the next level version of myself? Because I feel like, and this may just, feel pretty tag in here, our podcasts are a reflection of like our growth and where we're at and what we're doing. And so for me, when I think about my journey, like connect and convert was kind of like my little saying at the time. I was like, well, if you want to convert, you have to connect. And so I kind of was like in that realm. And then I gained more confidence and I got into, no, I make email marketing more simplified. So that's where email marketing simplified came from. And then I stepped up another notch and I kind of been going up this staircase and figuring out who is Ashley DeLuca? What does Ashley DeLuca do? What is she here to say? What is like, who are the people or is she here to impact? And so like that then turned into, you know what? No, I really talk about communication, like at the core of my principles, because I don't just talk about email marketing. And that was a huge distinction that my mentor, George Bryant, helped me through. And he had shared with me and was like, oh yeah, dude, like, no, it's so much bigger than what you think it is. And I was like, oh, okay, I can get on that train ride. And so for me, I try to keep it as simple as possible. Most of the time, it's just like an episode letting everybody know that like, hey, this is coming and this is what's happening. So if you're like looking for me, like it now changed. But then after that, it's just about like, you know what? Like, it's all good. Like people will find me and my name's still in it. So it's all good.
Yes. I love that so much. So when it comes to email marketing, specifically for your podcast, I know that I don't like sending emails even to my list. I don't like sending emails to anyone that I don't really like, unless it's like a client and I have to send an email to them about something. You know what I mean? So what are some like tips and tricks and strategies to maybe help podcasters share their podcast on a more regular basis without feeling like they're spamming their list or not really like this is the only way that they're showing up for that list?
Yeah, totally. No, I love this question because one of the biggest trends that I've seen as of recently is, and I'm on like so many people's lists, it's not even funny as I like study this, right? But I get all these emails where it's like every Tuesday or every Monday, and it's literally just a copy of the show notes in an email. And I was like really sitting with it because I was like, this doesn't really entice me. Like, I don't really feel like I want to go listen to the episode. And when I get to that thought process, I always think, well, why? Why is that? And then I go deeper. I'm like, well, why is that? Why is that? And I think I'm like a 2-year-old. Why, right? And so for me, it turned into, well, I don't feel enticed because I'm already technically subscribed to the podcast. So Apple Podcasts, like that's what I use to listen to mine, already notifies me of a new episode. And then when I did end up turning notifications off for literally all the things, which is another conversation of like why I do that. But like, anyways, I still log into my app like basically every single day. And so I'm already aware that Susie Q's episode already comes out every Tuesday. I already got that, right? And so what ends up happening within that as well too is then we start to realize, oh, okay, now we're getting kind of into like a repetitive mode where we're just going to get ignored. So then the question really comes down to of like, okay, how can we show up consistently for our audience to share about our podcast in a non-repetitive way that they're just going to basically archive our message, right?
Right.
And so really for me, what it comes down to is stories. For me, that's what it's really about. It's like taking like a primary anchor story to be able to then walk them through like a scenario. So like for an example, one of my newest episodes that are coming out is about like relatability and how to infuse relatability into your email marketing. And so, for an example, like I could talk about like a story about how I stepped into being relatable. Like this is actually something that I just got done like on a Clubhouse talking about too, is like, oh my gosh, well, what it really comes down to is like people want to feel relatable with other people. And so like before I was not really that relatable. I was just this girl with a boyfriend. I lived in Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't that interesting. Yeah, I had a dog, but I didn't really talk about the dog. And I was basically just like a boring pea pod. Like if we're just being totally honest, like just so boring. And then when I was like, okay, cool. Well, like no one can relate to me besides maybe having a dog, which like, okay, that's cool. But I was like, how can I be like more relatable? Like, and like, how are people engaging? Because I was looking at these influencers and I was like, why are they so successful? Like, why do these people get attracted to them? And I was like, because they are relatable, right? Like that's what it comes down to. And so using those relatable stories, and so for like the example, to kind of get back to that, it's really about being able to talk about like, yeah, like I used to be super unrelatable, very intentionally because I was hiding and I didn't feel like I could step into that and I couldn't share the weird, quirky things about Ashley DeLuca. But now I'm like, now that I've stepped into my relatability, now you hear me talking with my 2-year-old. You hear the sea turtles and the avocados and the email, and you hear about all of the craziness about how, like, I absolutely want to move to Florida, but I absolutely hate the heat. Like, all of it, right? All of those pieces. And so you can walk them through a story and then talk about, hey, in this episode, I'm going to teach you or not really, I don't like to use the word secret, but like, I'm going to teach you like how to then create that relatability in your email marketing. I'm going to walk you through the process. So that way you can then take that and run with it and be that actionable thing. Because I know for most of us, like we're doing interviews, but they still have actionable things that go with them. And so that gives you a really good way to be able to lean that into a story. And that's how you can start it off differently. The CTA can still be the same. I mean, in all the emails, that's totally fine if that's your only thing that you're looking to kind of grow in your ecosystem. But it all starts with that top portion of your copy, with grabbing their attention into a story. So that way they become engaged. And then they're like, well, of course I want to go through this and listen to this podcast episode because that's what I need.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. That's so good. That relatability, it's so hard. I think especially as podcasters, because we're kind of hiding behind a microphone. Most of the time we don't have our video on and people can't really see us. They just hear us. And so bringing more spice to who we are as people. Let's talk a little bit about that. How do you, how were you able to infuse your personality into it? Because you said avocado, sea turtles, and I'm like, yes, I know I'm friends with Ashley on Facebook. All of those things are totally her. Email marketing. If you need help with that, you go to her. So how do you kind of infuse that into your, how you're having conversations with other people, but also just showing up as you and feeling okay with that? You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first kind of step within that is figuring out what that looks like for you. Listen, do not go around talking about sea turtles and avocados because they're going to be like, what are you doing? Go talk about lions and bobo tea or whatever it's called, with the little squirty ball thingies that are so amazing. Yes. Oh, I'm here for that. No, go talk about that. That's totally completely cool. Figure out what that is. And I also want to say, it doesn't always have to be the same thing. You don't have to be oh my gosh, yes, that's my thing forever. One day I may not like avocados and I may like pears. I don't know. I haven't figured that part out yet. But right now it's avocados and that's cool. So figure out what that is first. And then the secondary thing about that is infuse it as part of both of your, I like to say your copy or your textual side of your brand plus the visual side of your brand. So if you go to my website, you're going to see avocados everywhere. That's very prominent within my brand. Now, in terms of with sea turtles, that wasn't necessarily part of my brand with the design of the website particularly, because I was oh my gosh, that's way too much. Let's just do avocados. But within my content, I talk about, my husband for my birthday, we adopted this sea turtle and her name is April, which is perfect because my birthday's in April, right? And leaking that into some of your content where you're just sharing about it, making it part of your bio, making it part of when you talk to people and saying, oh my gosh, especially when we have these DM conversations and you're just trying to get to know somebody, actually genuinely, not hey, do you need my help kind of thing, but genuinely wanting to know somebody. That's something that I ask people. I'm oh my gosh, I absolutely love sea turtles. Do you have a favorite sea animal as well? Or a favorite animal in general, right? Mm-hmm. And that actually tells you so much about a person. Now, I'm not this animal reader person. I don't even know what it's called. That's not me, but I will be ooh, if this person likes a lion, ooh, what does that say about that person? What does a lion mean? And I can tell you what a sea turtle means and what that means about me and me liking sea turtles, but it's being able to figure that out, infuse that into your conversation and just gradually leak it in. I tell stories about it. I get really excited about it. I mean, there's just like those little things that like when you're just talking and when you're making posts on Facebook or on Instagram or you're talking about it on stories, add in the stickers. Like all of those things matter, and they kind of are just simple, easy ways to be able to easily add it into your marketing without being overpowering or being like, oh my gosh, all she ever talks about is sea turtles.
I love this so much. I have a friend and she always talks about tacos and like Cinco de Mayo and all the Taco Tuesday. And like, so she has friends that will literally like virtual business friends who will send her taco paraphernalia. And like, that's like her. She talks about tacos. She just loves them. I myself talk about Star Wars and how much I love Star Wars. And in my bio, it says if I'm not chasing my kids around, then you'll find me watching the latest Star Wars with my husband. On my brand photos that I just got done, I had a big Darth Vader on my t-shirt. And like it's just very much me. It's my brand. It's who I am. I like Star Wars. So like, this is it. This is what we're here for. So I love your ideas of like the visual and the copy and kind of marrying those two together to then incorporate you-ness. And I think that's what really makes you unique and makes your brand stand out. That's so good. Ugh, gold.
Oh my gosh. Yes, no, I love that. I have to show, I mean, obviously like podcast listeners won't be able to see this, but my husband got me its own kind of like replica baby Yoda, like what they kind of used on set. And I'm like here for it. Like he's even fuzzy. Like you can even like pet the top of his head and he's like fuzzy. My husband is also obsessed with Star Wars. And I think the coolest thing about that is like you're gonna attract other people who like Star Wars. Like I can tell you right now, one other person who is absolutely obsessed with Star Wars. And like within that, it creates those connections and those memorable points of like, if I'm out and I see Star Wars, I'm going to be like, ooh, yes, I know exactly who would like that. And I get the same thing where I'll have people send me links to avocado stuff literally all the time. They're like, we just thought of you. Like someone sent me avocado earrings. Like 2 different people actually have sent me avocado earrings. And like, I got you something. And I was like, okay, here's my address. Like, okay, we'll see what happens. But yeah, all of those things make a huge difference. And I think also one other thing as well too that I'll mention is like when you write your emails and as you're writing your copy, if you write it as if you're writing to a friend, that is how you get to that personal, more relatable standpoint. Because these are things that I would exactly tell my best friend, Ashley. I would be like, oh my gosh, Ashley, you would not believe what just happened. Like, I got this sushi today and it had avocado in it and it was so freaking good. And like, even something just about that, like I could write a whole post about me and my sushi and avocado being in my sushi kind of thing, right? And that's an easy way to talk about avocado, like infuse the avocado piece of it. But then I can always talk about how like there's different pieces to a thing of sushi. Like you have the rice and then you have the seaweed. And like with email marketing, like you have to have the foundation in order to be able to then add the seaweed. And that keeps the sushi together, right? And so like there's easy ways that you can then take different things that you're doing in your life that you may think are just like, ooh, I'm eating a sloppy Joe sandwich. Yeah, it's like super sloppy, but like what makes a sloppy Joe sandwich? And then you can like relate it back to what you're doing. So there's like tons of things like that.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. I think the same goes for podcast content too, like I think some people, I mean, there are plenty of people who they will read their podcasts and that's great for some people. I personally always want my listeners to feel like I'm in the car with them. And like, we're just chit-chatting. We're having some girl talk. It is happening. This is what we're talking about. Real talk, like no BS. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so bringing that into the podcast content as well, I think is so important in making sure that you are talking to your audience because you're in their ears while they're doing their normal everyday stuff, whether that's walking the dog, changing their kid's diaper, putting dinner on, whatever. And that creates a deeper connection with your audience that way.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And one of the things that I got as feedback a couple days ago about my podcast is they were like, man, you're just so easy to listen to because you don't talk at me. I feel like you're talking with me. And I think that makes a huge difference within podcasting and also written content of making sure that you're not talking at people and just, again, having that kind of conversation. Like I made a post yesterday on my page and I was like, literally guys, I have this idea. I don't know if it's dumb. Please let me know. And I like listed out the idea and I was like, if you guys are interested in this, like let me know with a yay and I'll pick 3 people that I'll like give this to for free, like that I'm creating, right? And so that gave me the validation of like, this idea is good. But then also too, like I framed it as if like, no, like girl, like I need to know what your feedback is. Like, let me know. And so many people responded to it because they felt that even though it was a post to my like 5,000 friends, right? And I think that makes a huge difference as well too when you're podcasting, creating content, when you're just engaging with other people because people want to feel exclusive. They want to feel valued. And the best way that you can do that is through very conversational copy.
Yes. Oh, so good. So your podcast is very niched, right? Like you are like email marketing all the way. I would love to know maybe some ways that you're able to diversify your content while still talking email marketing. So I have one client where she does marketing. And so she talks social media marketing, email marketing, but there's like variances to what she talks about. And one thing I talk about with my clients a lot is content buckets. So making sure that you kind of have 3 to 5 things, kind of like general ideas of things that you're typically talking about, or one motto that you kind of funnel your content through. Email marketing is very, very specific. So what are some ways that you're able to diversify your content to still feel like we're not talking about the same thing over and over again and still create great content for your podcast?
Yeah, no, I love this. And this is something that I've had to work through and figure out because, yeah, so often everybody does have all of these buckets. And I'm just like, no, I can't really kind of fit in that. So basically what I do, so I do 2 different things. So the first thing that I do is I bring on guests who kind of give a little bit of a different perspective, but also link into email marketing. So for an example, I had a lawyer come on and she did talk about legal lawyerly things, but we did specifically talk about the legal side of email marketing, which is super incredibly important. So that allowed to feed into that normal email marketing conversation while also bringing in other outlets of like, what is GDPR? What does that look like? How does that then go onto a website? And then on the website side into email and all of that. So that's one thing. The other thing that I do is, well, I'm going to make this 3 things. I'm sorry. So the second thing is that I do allow myself the ability to own my own space and my own platform. So there are times that I will go through and talk about something completely and totally different and just preface that, right? By obviously the title of the podcast. Like I remember one time I made this episode about how I went from 60-hour work weeks to 25-hour work weeks because so many people were asking and seeing that. And I was, hinting to that in my podcast when I was talking, but they were just like, well, we want to know how, like, what is the how behind this? And so that allowed me to be able to open that door to then be able to talk about that. And so just being like, hey, this was requested, so I'm going to talk about it. This isn't your jam. You already got it figured out. No worries. Next week we'll be right back on track. The third thing is that, so for like my content buckets, I actually focus on my kind of 5C communication method. And so my 5 C's are connection, conversation, congruency, customer journey, and consistency. Now, within those 5 different buckets, I can go 1,000 different ways, especially with consistency, right? Like, how do you become consistent? What does consistent look like? How do you be consistent in email marketing? Or how do you consistently show up in your communication? Like, there's so many different ways. So I usually anchor into my method to then be able to go off of different ideas and contents and things like that. And then I also really leaned into my audience and asked them, especially when people reach out and they're like, oh my gosh, I love your podcast. I'm like, well, what would you like to see? What is something that maybe I haven't covered enough or something you want me? And like, that was one of my recent episodes about defining your client voice that someone was like, I don't know how to do that. Like, what's your suggestion around that? So I did a whole episode about it. So that's kind of how I do my content. And I just really feel into what people are looking for, what people are asking. But then also I feel into what is it that I feel called to share right now in this season with kind of the idea that it'll be most likely around email marketing.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. I love that you've got like your whole acronym thing going with the 5 C's and the buckets. So good. Because you really can. You can take that anywhere. And then also giving yourself that space that like, also you weren't, when you talked about that episode, and I've listened to that episode, it's a really good one.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Going from 60 to 25 hours of working a week. Like, I think that it's so relevant still to your audience, right? Like, you're not talking about dog grooming.
Right. Totally.
It's not totally off the wall where it's like, okay, that probably should have been an Instagram story. You know what I mean?
Yes. No. And that makes so much sense. And I think also too, like being able to lean into, so for me, I guess let me put it this way. So for me, Instagram is where Ashley can just be totally Ashley. Whatever comes out, totally comes out. And like, I just talk about what the fudge ever comes to my mind. I'm like, listen, if I'm really like fired up about something, like I'm going on there and talking about it. Right. And then that allows me to get that space of knowing, okay, cool. This really resonates with my audience. Maybe I should do a podcast about this, or man, this really resonates. I can dive deeper into this or go into a certain topic. If I get a question, I can then go into that. So I even think about it in a way, because someone was asking me the other day about my funnel, right? Of like, well, what's your awareness funnel look like? What does that look like for you? And they're like, well, we know you have these different things. And I was like, honestly, for me, I usually put like podcasts and Instagram right up at the top because it's really about bringing that awareness. Like that's really what I want to do is bring people awareness of like who I am, what I do, and also, giving them that support and that awareness of like, here's what's possible. And then they were like, well, what's the next step? What do you do after that? And I was like, well, honestly, I switch back and forth between those two things. And because both of them are technically linked to my email, I talk about being able to join my email list in both facets. But within that, I was like, those are very extremely, extremely consistent touch points that are happening continuously, right? Like with a podcast, you can go and binge I have almost 70 episodes, like all 70 of those episodes, or you can go into my Instagram and get lost for days, I'm sure. And so like with email is like for me, super incredibly intentional about like who I'm speaking to and what that looks like. So usually like email is like that second thing down because I want to make sure that those people on my email list are people who actually are like, I really like Ashley DeLuca. I like what she's saying. I'm interested in learning more and I'm possibly maybe interested in working with her as well too. That kind of like, I mean, if you want to or not, that's totally cool with me. I don't care. You can be on my email list. But within that, I think it's really incredibly important to kind of filter through before you just add everybody to your list because of your deliverability, because of sender score, because of like all of these super technical things that I could go on for days about, and just ensuring that the right people are on your list.
Yes. Yeah. It's so much more than just a numbers game.
Yep.
So what are some ways that you kind of recommend that people go from, people have different goals for their podcasts. Some people want to make money from their podcast. Some people want direct business from their podcast. Others want to grow their email list. So what are some ways that you recommend that people take their listeners to their email list?
So number one, please make the URL as short as possible. Oh my gosh. I remember back in the day, I was listening to podcasts and there's a couple that come to mind and they're like, please go to ashleykdeluca.com/your Instagram challenge that you need today. And I'm like, and I'm like driving. Okay. And I'm like, dude, this is too long. I'm never going to remember this. So make sure that your URL is literally as short as possible. Make sure, as you guys already know, put the links in the bio. That is so helpful for us moms who are like cleaning and changing diapers while listening to podcasts, because I'm not going to remember where in the world it is, even in the episode if you're talking about it, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that make sure it's very actionably clear of like what the main takeaway is. One of the biggest things that I've learned is that, like, especially when you're doing lead magnets, like, fluffy does not rule, guys. Fluff is just fluff. And so when you can really nail down specifically the outcome of what it is that's going to happen from that, it really helps. Now, obviously, we kind of get stuck in this ambiguity land of like, well, what if they don't implement it? Well, I don't want to promise something that they may not do. Like, that's fine, right? Like, I know in my heart that if you take these 5 emails that I've created, you'll be able to then understand email marketing on a deeper level and then be able to replicate that in your own emails. Like, I can tell you that for a fact, right? Now, the results that come from that, that's up to you and your business and your audience and all the things. But you can hold on to that, right? So be as clear as possible, but then also too, I really like to think about how can you take, again, like thinking about the funnel, like how can we take this big audience and narrow down the right people? Because that's what it is. Like, and it's nothing more frustrating than getting a bunch of applications for people who aren't the right fit, because you get excited, you see an application and you're just like, gosh darn it. No, they're not the right fit for whatever reason, right? So being abundantly clear in your lead magnet also really helps with that too, to make sure that you're attracting the right kind of people. I'll tell you a quick story about one of my lead magnets. Back in the day, one of my first lead magnets was a collection of 50 girl boss quotes. And I was like, this is so awesome. Everybody wants quotes right now. Like, this will be great. And I literally got everyone and their freaking grandma on my email list. I was like, this is so dumb, Ashley. Why did you do this? Like, you're not even attracting the right kind of people. You have everybody and your grandma on your email list now. And now I have more work to figure out who is my ideal client and who's actually going to open. And it hurt my open and my click rates and my deliverability because people were sending my stuff to spam, saying it was spam. And I was like, no, I promise I'm not. And then also too, they were just like, well, I don't want to listen to this Ashley girl. I don't even know who she, like, so be as specific as possible. Keep your link as short as possible. Make sure you add it into the bio, as we all know. And then also too, within that, be as specific as possible on the outcome and who it's for within your kind of 30-minute little segment to make sure that it actually really attracts the people that you're wanting.
That is so good. So good. If you had got nothing else from this episode but those tips, like those are quick implementable things that you can do today with your podcast. Oh, thank you so much, Ashley. if you could just tell everybody where they can find you, where they can hang out with you, where they can find your newly rebranded podcast.
Okay, guys, so I'll just make this super incredibly easy. So if you hop on over to ashleykdeluca.com, so ASHLEY, the letter just K, and then DeLuca, DELUCA.com. That's where you can find my podcast. You can find basically all the things over there. And then also, too, you can find me over on Instagram, which is where I mainly hang out right now, which is Ashley DeLuca. I almost said .com again, but that's just over on Instagram. So, yeah.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that we have the links in there in the show notes so that way you guys can get it. I know Apple's changing their link in the show notes. So if you have Apple Podcasts and you can't find the links, that's why. But yes, I know. They're always trying to ruin everything. All right. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you. Thank
you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.